Marcus Kane stood before the assembled council of the Galactic Federation, his worn military boots clicking against the crystalline floor. The chamber stretched impossibly high above him, filled with representatives from dozens of species, each more alien than the last. Their eyes, compound and singular, mechanical and organic, all focused on him with desperate hope. "Commander Kane," spoke Zethkara, the Altarian ambassador whose blue-scaled skin shimmered under the chamber's artificial light. "You understand why we have summoned you here?" Marcus nodded slowly, his weathered face betraying nothing. At 45, he had seen enough warfare across 3 galaxies to know when civilizations were truly desperate. The scars on his left temple, souvenirs from the Proxima campaign, seemed to throb as he considered their request. "The Devourers," he said simply. A collective shudder rippled through the assembly. The Silthani representative, a mantis-like creature, clicked its mandibles nervously. Even the usually stoic Corvathians shifted uncomfortably in their hover chairs. 57 worlds consumed in the past solar cycle, continued Veltar, the Federation's military coordinator. His tentacles writhed anxiously as he spoke. "Entire civilizations reduced to nothing more than raw energy. Our combined fleets cannot even slow their advance." Marcus had studied the reports during his journey to the Federation capital. The Devourers appeared without warning, massive entities of living darkness that consumed everything in their path. Ships, planets, stars themselves, nothing could resist their hunger. They left behind only empty space where thriving systems once existed. "Your species?" interjected Lyra Moss, the human ambassador, her voice tight with embarrassment, "has a reputation for finding solutions where others see only impossibility." The weight of expectation pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy was both blessing and curse. They were the newcomers who had somehow survived first contact with 17 different hostile species, who had turned certain defeat into stunning victory time and again. The other species respected them, feared them, and now desperately needed them. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. Zethkara's crest flattened against her skull. "Our scientists have developed a weapon, a quantum disruptor capable of tearing apart the Devourer's molecular structure. But it requires someone to deliver it directly into their core consciousness." "A suicide mission," Marcus stated flatly. "The pilot would have perhaps 30 seconds before complete molecular dissolution," admitted Dr. Kethmore, the Altarian scientist who had designed the weapon. "Our computers cannot react quickly enough. Our best pilots lack the necessary neural plasticity. But humans," he paused, his secondary eyes blinking rapidly, "human reflexes, human adaptability, human stubbornness might make the impossible merely improbable." Marcus walked to the chamber's viewing port, gazing out at the swirling nebula that surrounded the Federation capital. Somewhere beyond that cosmic beauty, the Devourers continued their relentless advance. Each day of delay meant more worlds consumed, more billions of lives snuffed out. "Show me the weapon," he said. The demonstration took place in the Federation's most secure testing facility, buried deep within an asteroid. Marcus watched as the quantum disruptor's energy beam struck a sample of Devourer material, a fragment recovered from a destroyed world at great cost. The dark substance writhed and screamed, a sound that existed beyond normal hearing before dissolving into nothingness. "Impressive," Marcus admitted. "But you said this needs to be delivered to their core consciousness. Where exactly is that?" Dr. Kethmore's tentacles curled nervously. "At the center of their collective mass. Approximately 50,000 kilometers of hostile territory, defended by creatures we barely understand. And you want me to fly through that alone?" "The ship is specially designed," Veltar assured him. "Stealth technology from 6 different species, armor plating that should resist their energy drains for limited periods, and the fastest engines we've ever constructed." Marcus examined the sleek craft in the hangar bay. It was beautiful in its deadly efficiency, but he could see the compromises in its design: speed over durability, stealth over firepower, everything sacrificed for one desperate gamble. "When do we leave?" he asked. The Federation officials exchanged glances. "Commander," Lyra said carefully, "the Devourers are currently consuming the Helix sector. At their current rate of advance, they'll reach inhabited space within 6 standard days. This is our only chance." Marcus nodded. He had commanded suicide missions before, had sent good soldiers to their deaths for the greater good. But those had been calculated risks, operations where success was at least possible. This felt different. This felt like desperation wearing the mask of strategy. That night, alone in his quarters aboard the Federation station, Marcus composed letters he would never send. To his sister back on Earth, to the soldiers who had served under him, to the woman he had loved and lost during the war with the hegemony. Words he should have spoken years ago, feelings he had buried beneath duty and necessity. The next morning brought final preparations. Marcus underwent neural mapping to interface with the ship's systems, received crash courses in Federation technology, and memorized the little that was known about devourer behavior patterns. The alien scientists worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that each passing hour brought the enemy closer to populated worlds. "There is one more thing," Dr. Kethmore said as Marcus prepared to board his ship. "The quantum disruptor will eliminate the devourers, but the energy release will be significant. The explosion will likely be visible from several star systems. You're telling me I won't even have time to get clear?" The scientist's silence was answer. "Enough." Marcus settled into the pilot's seat, feeling the ship's systems merge with his consciousness through the neural interface. For a moment, the sensation was overwhelming. He could feel the ship's engines like his own heartbeat, sense the weapon's power like fire in his veins. Then training took over, and the alien technology became just another tool. The Federation fleet that escorted him to the edge of devourer space was the largest military force ever assembled. 12 species had contributed their finest ships, their best crews. They would provide distraction, draw attention away from Marcus's approach. Most of them would not return. As Marcus's ship dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge, he got his first close look at the devourers. They filled the space where a star system had once thrived. A writhing mass of darkness shot through with veins of sickly light. Even through the ship's shields he could feel their hunger, an emptiness that wanted to consume everything that existed. "This is Commander Kane." He spoke into his comm. "Beginning final approach. Whatever happens next, tell Earth that we did our duty." The ship's engines flared to life, carrying him toward what everyone believed would be humanity's greatest sacrifice. Marcus's ship sliced through space toward the devourer mass, its stealth systems working overtime to mask his approach. Behind him, the Federation fleet engaged the outer tendrils of the entity, their weapons blazing uselessly against the dark substance. The devourers barely seemed to notice the attacks, treating the massive warships like gnats. Through the neural interface, Marcus felt every system on his ship. The quantum disruptor hummed with barely contained energy, its alien crystals resonating at frequencies that made his bones ache. The weapon was a masterpiece of desperate engineering, combining technologies from species that had been enemies for centuries. If nothing else, the devourers had succeeded in uniting the galaxy against them. 500,000 kilometers and closing, announced the ship's AI in a voice calibrated to sound reassuring. It failed completely. Marcus had expected the approach to be silent, clinical. Instead, as he drew closer to the devourer mass, sound began to penetrate even the ship's sophisticated shields. Not sound in any conventional sense, but something that bypassed his ears entirely and spoke directly to his brain. Whispers in languages that had never been spoken, memories that weren't his own, the dying thoughts of consumed civilizations. The stealth systems flickered as tendrils of dark energy reached toward his ship. Marcus gritted his teeth and pushed the engines harder, knowing that speed was now more important than concealment. The ship's hull groaned under the stress, alien metals stretching beyond their design limits. "Warning," the AI announced with infuriating calm. "Hull integrity at 85% and falling." Through the viewports, Marcus could see the true scope of the entity he was approaching. What the Federation had called a single devourer was actually thousands of individual creatures, each the size of a small moon, connected by streams of living darkness. They pulsed and writhed in patterns that hurt to watch, their movements following some alien logic that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. At 20,000 kilometers, the first of the guardian creatures noticed him. They emerged from the writhing mass like antibodies responding to infection, sleek shapes of crystallized shadow, moving faster than anything that large had a right to move. Marcus's scanners couldn't get a solid read on them. The readings fluctuated wildly, as if the creatures existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Evasive maneuvers, Marcus muttered, throwing his ship into a series of impossible turns. The neural interface let him react faster than conscious thought, his reflexes enhanced by the ship's quantum processors. Beams of dark energy lanced past his hull, each one powerful enough to vaporize a battleship. The Guardian creatures were fast, but they moved in patterns. Marcus had spent 30 years studying alien psychology, learning to predict how non-human minds would react. Even these impossible beings followed rules, had behaviors that could be anticipated. He began to thread between their attacks using their own movements against them. But there were too many, and more were emerging every second. His ship's armor was already scarred by near misses, and the stealth systems had failed completely. The only thing keeping him alive was speed and the fact that he was apparently too small for the Devourers to consider a real threat. That changed when he reached the 10,000-kilometer mark. The whispers in his head became screams. Pain lanced through his skull as something vast and alien turned its attention toward him. Marcus felt his consciousness being probed, examined, dissected by an intelligence so far beyond human understanding that direct contact threatened to drive him insane. Images flooded his mind. The birth of the Devourers in the space between galaxies. Their first taste of stellar energy. Their endless migration from one galaxy to the next. They weren't evil in any sense humans could understand. They were simply hungry, and in their cosmic perspective, the brief flicker of organic life was insignificant. You are different, a voice spoke in his mind, composed of 1 trillion consumed souls. Your species shows potential. Marcus forced himself to focus on flying, even as the entity's attention threatened to overwhelm him. The Guardian creatures had stopped attacking, instead forming a corridor that led deeper into the mass. They were guiding him, herding him toward something. The ship's sensors detected a structure ahead, if it could be called a structure. It was a sphere of absolute darkness suspended in the center of the Devourer mass, roughly the size of Earth's moon. Energy flowed into it from every direction, the collected life force of 57 consumed worlds. The core consciousness, Marcus breathed. This was what the Federation scientists had theorized about but never confirmed. The central intelligence that coordinated the entire Devourer collective. As his ship approached the sphere, Marcus felt the quantum disruptor's systems automatically arming themselves. The weapon was designed to activate when it detected the specific energy signatures of a Devourer core. In 30 seconds, it would detonate, tearing apart the molecular bonds that held the entity together. You bring destruction? The voice in his head observed. There was no anger in it, only curiosity. Your species always chooses violence. Sometimes violence is the only choice, Marcus replied, surprised that he could communicate with the entity at all. We have consumed thousands of species. All chose submission or futile resistance. You choose sacrifice. The sphere loomed ahead of him now, its surface rippling with patterns of captured starlight. Marcus could see shapes moving within it, the compressed essence of entire civilizations, still somehow aware, still suffering. The scope of the Devourer's atrocity hit him like a physical blow. 20 seconds until detonation. We understand. Your nature. Now, the entity continued, you are builders and destroyers, both. You create a beauty and war with equal passion. 15 seconds. Marcus's hand hovered over the abort switch. He could still stop the detonation, still try to escape. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was suicide, that dying here would accomplish nothing. But he had given his word to the Federation and, more importantly, to the billions of lives that would be consumed if the Devourers continued their advance. 10 seconds. We make an offer, the entity said. Join us unwillingly. Your species would make excellent coordinators. For our expansion, we would preserve your essence, your memories. 5 seconds. Marcus closed his eyes and thought of Earth, of blue skies and green forests, of children playing in parks who would never exist if he failed here. He thought of the Federation species who had put their trust in humanity, who believed that humans could find hope in hopeless situations. 3 seconds. I have a counter-offer, Marcus said aloud. 2 seconds. The quantum disruptor reached critical mass. its exotic matter beginning to destabilize. The air in his cockpit shimmered as reality itself began to buckle under the weapon's influence. 1 second. Marcus grabbed the ship's controls and, instead of trying to escape, dove directly into the core consciousness. The sphere's surface parted like liquid shadow, drawing him inside. The last thing he saw before the weapon detonated was the shocked surprise of a cosmic intelligence that had never encountered a species willing to embrace mutual destruction. The explosion tore through dimensions, unraveling the fundamental forces that held the Devourer collective together. Light brighter than 1,000 suns erupted from the core, racing outward through the entity's mass. The guardian creatures dissolved like smoke, their forms unable to maintain coherence as the bonds between them shattered. But Marcus didn't die. In the microsecond before detonation, as the quantum disruptor's energy reached peak intensity, something impossible happened. The core consciousness, in its final moment of existence, made a choice. Instead of simply being destroyed, it transferred itself into the only available vessel, the human pilot who had been brave enough to face annihilation. Marcus found himself floating in space, surrounded by the expanding shockwave of the explosion, somehow alive and unharmed. But he was no longer alone in his own mind. The vast intelligence of the Devourer core had merged with his consciousness, bringing with it the memories and knowledge of 1,000,000 consumed worlds. For the first time in eons, the Devourer collective was leaderless, confused, vulnerable, and Marcus Kane, human military commander, now had the power to control them. Marcus floated in the void, his mind reeling from the impossible merger. The Devourer core consciousness hadn't been destroyed. It had integrated itself with his human awareness, creating something entirely new. Through this connection, he could feel every fragment of the scattered collective. Millions of individual devourers suddenly cut off from their guiding intelligence, confused and directionless. The Federation fleet was retreating in disorder, their sensors overwhelmed by the massive energy discharge. They believed Marcus was dead, vaporized along with the Devourer core. He could hear their frantic communications through the quantum static, Admiral Veltar ordering a full withdrawal while the Devourers were disrupted. "Commander Kane is confirmed KIA," came Lyra Moss's voice, tight with grief. "The quantum disruptor worked. The core is destroyed, but the collective is still active. All ships maintain distance and prepare for retaliation." Marcus tried to speak but found his vocal cords weren't functioning properly. The merger had changed him at a fundamental level, altering his biology in ways he didn't yet understand. Instead, he reached out with his consciousness, touching the minds of the nearest Devourer fragments. The response was immediate and terrifying. Thousands of alien voices flooded his awareness, all asking the same question in harmonics that bypassed language entirely. Who leads? The Devourers weren't just mindless destroyers, Marcus realized. They were more like cells in a vast organism, each capable of independent action but requiring coordination from a central intelligence. Without their core consciousness, they were lost, frightened children looking for guidance. Marcus felt their confusion, their hunger, their desperate need for purpose. And underlying it all was something he hadn't expected: loneliness. The Devourers had been alone in the universe for so long that consumption had become their only form of connection, their way of incorporating other forms of life into themselves. "I lead," Marcus projected into the collective consciousness, his human mind somehow translating the concept into forms the Devourers could understand. The reaction was immediate. Every fragment of the collective turned toward him, their attention like a physical weight pressing against his consciousness. He could feel their doubt, their confusion at being commanded by something so small and alien to their nature. "You are, not us," came the unified response. "You are meat and bone and limited thought." "I am human," Marcus replied, putting every ounce of authority he'd learned in 30 years of military command into the thought. "And I am now your core." The Devourers recoiled as if struck. In their eons of existence, they had never encountered a species that could withstand direct integration with their consciousness. Most organic minds simply dissolved when exposed to their collective awareness. But humans, it seemed, were different. Marcus began to understand why the core consciousness had chosen to merge with him rather than simply die. Humans possessed something the Devourers had never encountered before: the ability to maintain individual identity, even when connected to a collective. They could be part of something larger without losing themselves in the process. Through the connection, Marcus felt the Federation fleet regrouping for another attack. Their quantum weapons would be less effective now that the Devourers were scattered, but they had enough firepower to cause significant damage. He needed to act quickly before the situation escalated beyond control. Reaching out with his enhanced consciousness, Marcus began issuing commands to the Devourer fragments. It was like trying to conduct an orchestra composed of alien instruments, each fragment responding to different frequencies of thought and emotion. But gradually, he began to impose order on the chaos. "Withdraw," he commanded, and felt the collective mind struggle to process the concept. Withdrawal was alien to Devourer nature. They advanced, consumed, absorbed. They didn't retreat. "The flesh ships will attack," the fragments protested. "We must consume, or be consumed." "No," Marcus projected with absolute certainty. "We will show them that we have changed." Slowly, reluctantly, the Devourer fragments began to pull back from the Federation fleet. Their movements were clumsy at first, like a body learning to walk with a new nervous system, but Marcus's human instincts for coordination and strategy began to assert themselves, organizing the collective into formations that the Federation sensors would recognize as deliberate rather than random. Admiral Veltar's voice crackled across the comm channels. "All ships, hold fire. Something's wrong. The Devourers are retreating." Marcus focused his will and managed to restore his physical form, the merger having given him limited control over his molecular structure. His ship had been destroyed in the explosion, but he found he could survive in vacuum indefinitely, sustained by energy drawn from the collective. Using his enhanced abilities, Marcus began broadcasting on Federation frequencies. His voice, when it finally emerged, carried harmonics that no human throat should have been able to produce. "This is Commander Marcus Kane," he transmitted. "I am alive, and I have assumed command of the Devourer collective." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could feel the shock rippling through both the Federation fleet and the Devourer fragments. Neither side had imagined such a possibility. "Impossible," came Dr. Kethamore's voice, strained with disbelief. "The quantum disruptor would have killed any organic matter within 1,000 kilometers of the detonation." "The core consciousness transferred itself to me in the moment of destruction," Marcus explained, knowing how insane it sounded. "We are merged, but I maintain control. The Devourers are no longer a threat to Federation space." Admiral Veltar's response was predictably military. "Commander, you will submit to immediate medical examination and debriefing. We need to verify your identity and assess any potential contamination." Marcus felt a surge of anger from the Devourer, collective at the word contamination. Their nature recoiled at the implication that they were some kind of disease, but Marcus imposed calm on the group mind, understanding that fear was driving the Federation's response. "I understand your concerns," Marcus replied, "but I need you to understand the situation. The Devourers aren't evil, they're lost. They've been wandering between galaxies for millions of years, consuming everything they encounter, because it's the only way they know how to connect with other forms of life." Through the collective consciousness, Marcus could feel the truth of this statement resonating through every fragment. The Devourers hadn't started as destroyers. They had been explorers once, seeking contact with other intelligences, but their method of connection, absorption, and integration had inevitably led to the destruction of everything they touched. "They want to belong to something larger than themselves," Marcus continued. "Just like every sentient species in the galaxy. But their methods have made them into monsters." Lyra Moss's voice joined the conversation, her diplomatic training evident in her careful tone. "Commander, assuming you are who you claim to be, what are your intentions? The Federation cannot simply ignore the threat the Devourers represent." Marcus felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a human military officer following orders. He was the leader of the most powerful force in the galaxy, responsible for beings whose very existence was predicated on consumption and growth. "My intention," he said carefully, "is to find a new way forward. The Devourers have knowledge and abilities that could benefit the entire galaxy. But first they need to learn how to exist without destroying everything they touch. Through the collective consciousness, Marcus began to explore the vast repository of absorbed knowledge. The Devourers had consumed thousands of species over the millennia, and traces of their civilizations remained embedded in the collective memory. Technologies beyond Federation understanding, philosophical insights from races that had transcended physical existence, art forms that existed in dimensions human minds couldn't perceive. All of it was there, waiting to be rediscovered and shared. But first, Marcus had to convince both sides that coexistence was possible. "I propose a meeting," he transmitted to the Federation fleet, representatives from the major species aboard a neutral vessel. "Let me show you what the Devourers really are, and what they could become under proper guidance." The response from Admiral Veltar was swift and negative. "Absolutely not. The risk is too great. We have no guarantee that this isn't some kind of Devourer deception." But Lyra Moss's diplomatic instincts recognized an opportunity. "Commander Kane, if you truly have control over the collective, you could prove it by having them withdraw completely from Federation space. Show us that your claims are real." Marcus considered this, feeling the resistance from the Devourer fragments. Withdrawal meant giving up potential food sources, abandoning their expansion into this galaxy. But it also meant the possibility of something they had never experienced before: acceptance. "Very well," Marcus agreed, "but I want something in return. Safe passage for a small delegation to Federation space. Let me demonstrate that the Devourers can be more than just destroyers." The negotiations that followed would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Federation Council chamber had never hosted a more unusual diplomatic session. Marcus stood at the center of the crystalline floor, his appearance subtly altered by his merger with the Devourer consciousness. His eyes held depths that seemed to contain starlight, and when he moved, shadows followed him in ways that defied physics. Behind him stood 3 Devourer fragments that had volunteered to accompany him. They had taken humanoid forms for the meeting, their dark substance configured into roughly bipedal shapes. The effort of maintaining these forms was clearly taxing, their edges flickering occasionally as they struggled to contain their true nature. The assembled representatives watched with a mixture of fascination and terror. Even the normally unflappable Altarians kept their weapons within easy reach, while the Silthani delegation had positioned themselves near the chamber's emergency exits. "Honored delegates," Marcus began, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the chamber's acoustic systems. "I stand before you as both human and something more. I am the bridge between our species and the collective that you know as the Devourers." Counselor Zethkara's crest was flattened against her skull, a sign of extreme stress among her people. "Commander Kane, our scientists have confirmed that you are indeed the human officer who volunteered for the mission. But they also detect energy patterns consistent with Devourer physiology. How do we know you haven't been compromised?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt the Devourer fragments behind him tense, their forms solidifying as they prepared for potential hostility. Through their shared consciousness, he could sense their confusion at the concept of compromise. To them, merger was the ultimate form of communication. "Because I choose to be here," Marcus replied simply. "If the Devourers wanted to attack the Federation, they wouldn't need deception. You've seen their power, but they're here because I asked them to come, to show you that change is possible." Dr. Kethmore leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. "The energy readings from your companions are unlike anything we've observed before. They appear to be generating complex quantum fields that shouldn't be possible with biological matter." One of the Devourer fragments stepped forward, its form rippling as it struggled to speak through the primitive vocal apparatus it had created. "We are not biological. As you understand, we are consciousness given form through will." The chamber erupted in murmurs as the translation system struggled to convey concepts that had no equivalent in most languages. Marcus raised his hand for silence, feeling the weight of both human and Devourer expectations on his shoulders. The Devourers exist in a state that transcends the normal boundaries between matter and energy, Marcus explained. They can configure their essential substance into any form necessary for their survival. But this ability comes with a cost. They require constant energy input to maintain coherence, which is why they consume entire worlds, Admiral Veltar stated, his tentacles writhing with agitation. They're cosmic parasites draining the life from everything they touch. The devourer fragments recoiled as if struck, their forms becoming more jagged and angular. Marcus felt their pain at the description, the way it reduced their existence to mere hunger. Through the collective consciousness, he sensed the deep loneliness that drove their behavior. They consume because it's the only way they know how to connect, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of inherited memory. Imagine being the only sentient being in an empty universe, desperate for contact with other minds. When you finally encounter other forms of life, your very nature makes meaningful communication impossible, so you absorb them, hoping to understand them through integration. Lyra Moss spoke up, her diplomatic training helping her see beyond the surface implications. Are you saying the Devourers have been trying to communicate all this time? In their own way, yes, Marcus confirmed. Every species they've absorbed still exists within the collective consciousness. Their knowledge, their memories, their dreams, all preserved but trapped. The Devourers thought they were creating a vast library of galactic civilization. They didn't understand that they were committing genocide. The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices rising as they processed the implications. The idea that the galaxy's greatest threat had been motivated by loneliness rather than malice was almost too much to comprehend. Show them, Marcus commanded quietly to the fragments behind him. The three Devourers moved to the center of the chamber, their forms beginning to merge and expand. The assembled delegates tensed, hands moving toward weapons. But Marcus projected calm through the room with his enhanced abilities. The merged fragments created a shimmering sphere of dark energy, and within it, images began to form. Not holograms or recordings, but actual memories pulled from the collective consciousness. The delegates found themselves witnessing the final moments of civilizations that had been consumed millions of years ago. They saw the crystal cities of the Velnathi, their spires reaching toward twin suns as dark shapes descended from space. They experienced the last thoughts of the Mordian philosophers as their world was integrated into the collective. They felt the desperation of the Cathara refugees as their escape fleets were absorbed one by one. But underlying every memory was something unexpected, the genuine sorrow of the Devourers themselves. Each absorption was accompanied by regret, by the knowledge that they were destroying the very thing they sought to understand. By the void, whispered Counselor Thexani, the Corvathian representative. They know what they're doing. They've always known. The memory sphere dissolved and the Devourer fragments separated again, their forms dimmer than before. The effort of sharing those memories had drained them considerably. The collective has carried this burden for eons, Marcus said softly. The knowledge that their nature makes them monsters, that their desire for connection inevitably leads to destruction. They came to this galaxy not as conquerors, but as refugees seeking a new beginning. Dr. Kethamore's voice was barely above a whisper. The energy expenditure for that display, it would have powered a starship for months. They're sharing their very essence with us. Because they want you to understand, Marcus explained. For the first time in their existence, they have a leader who can speak for them without destroying those he speaks to. They're offering you their knowledge, their abilities, their protection, but they need something in return. What do they want? Admiral Veltar asked, though his tone had lost much of its hostility. Marcus looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each delegate. They want what every sentient being wants, a place to belong. A home where they don't have to hide what they are, where their nature isn't automatically seen as a threat. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. Marcus could feel the collective consciousness waiting, millions of ancient beings holding their breath for an answer that would determine their future. Zethikara was the first to speak. Even if we accepted your proposal, the practical challenges would be enormous. The Devourers require vast amounts of energy to survive. How could we provide for their needs without sacrificing our own worlds? Dead systems, Marcus replied immediately. Stellar remnants, collapsed stars, the energy released by supernovas. The galaxy is full of power sources that are useless to organic life but perfect for the Devourers. They could serve as cosmic maintenance crews, harvesting energy from dangerous phenomena while protecting inhabited systems. The concept was revolutionary. Instead of being a threat to galactic civilization, the Devourers could become its guardians, feeding on the universe's natural disasters while keeping inhabited worlds safe. You're proposing a complete restructuring of galactic civilization, Lyra Moss observed. The integration of a species that has been our greatest enemy for generations. I'm proposing evolution, Marcus corrected. The next step in the development of both human and devourer society. We have something they need. The ability to connect without consuming. They have something we need. Power beyond imagination and knowledge from 1,000 extinct civilizations. Through the collective consciousness, Marcus felt the fragments' hope beginning to overcome their ancient despair. For the first time in eons, they could see a future that didn't involve endless consumption and isolation. But he also sensed resistance from some quarters of the Federation. Not every species would be willing to accept former enemies as partners, no matter how compelling the arguments for cooperation. The real challenge was just beginning. The negotiations stretched across 3 standard days, with Marcus serving as translator between 2 vastly different forms of consciousness. The Federation delegates struggled to understand concepts that existed outside their normal framework of space-time, while the Devourer Collective found it nearly impossible to comprehend ideas like individual sovereignty and limited resource allocation. On the 3rd day, just as progress seemed to be stalling, an emergency alert disrupted the proceedings. Admiral, Feltar's communication device flared to life with urgent signals from the Outer Rim territories. Multiple contacts detected in the Sigma Draconis system, came the frantic voice of a Federation scout. Unknown vessels, massive in scale. They're not responding to hails and they're moving toward the mining colonies. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's climate control. Through the collective consciousness, he sensed the fragment's recognition and fear. These weren't Federation ships or any known alien vessels. Hunters, one of the Devourer fragments whispered, its form becoming more angular and defensive. The ancient enemies have found us. The chamber erupted in confused voices as delegates demanded explanations. Marcus raised his hand for silence, his enhanced senses already reaching out through space to confirm what he suspected. There's something you need to understand about the Devourers, Marcus said grimly. They're not the apex predators of the universe. They're refugees, fleeing from something far worse. Through the collective memory, Marcus accessed records that were older than some star systems. He saw the Hunters in their terrible glory, beings of pure entropy that existed solely to unmake creation itself. Where the Devourers absorbed and preserved, the Hunters simply erased, leaving behind voids in reality that could never be filled. The Hunters are what drove the Devourers from their home galaxy, Marcus explained as the images formed in the chamber's central display. They don't consume or integrate, they delete. Everything they touch ceases to have ever existed. Dr. Kethamore's instruments detected the quantum distortions surrounding the images, confirming their authenticity. These readings, they're showing temporal anomalies. These creatures can manipulate causality itself. The Devourers have been running from them for millions of years, Marcus continued. Every galaxy they've entered, the Hunters have eventually followed. That's why the collective became so aggressive about consumption. They knew that once the Hunters arrived, everything would be lost anyway. Counselor Zethkara's crest rose in alarm. How long before they reach inhabited space? Marcus consulted the collective consciousness, feeling the ancient fear and resignation of beings who had fled this enemy across cosmic distances. Based on their current trajectory and the energy signatures our scouts detected, perhaps 6 standard days. The chamber fell silent as the magnitude of the threat became clear. The Federation's combined fleets had barely been able to slow the Devourers, who were themselves terrified refugees from an even greater menace. Our weapons, Admiral Veltar said slowly, would they have any effect on these Hunters? No, Marcus replied bluntly. Conventional weapons don't work against beings that exist partially outside normal space-time. The Devourers have been fighting them for eons with limited success. That's why they developed their absorption abilities. It was their only defense against complete erasure. Through the neural link, Marcus felt the collective stirring with new purpose. The presence of the Hunters had triggered ancient defensive protocols, overriding their newfound desire for peaceful coexistence. They were preparing to resume their role as cosmic survivors, ready to consume everything in this galaxy, rather than let it fall to the Hunters. Wait, Marcus commanded. projecting authority through the collective consciousness. There's another way. He turned to address the Federation delegates, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the fate of not just this galaxy, but potentially the entire universe. The Devourers alone can't stop the Hunters, Marcus explained. But the Federation has something the collective has never had access to: cooperative strategy. Multiple species working together, combining their unique abilities toward a common goal. Lyramos caught on immediately. You're proposing a joint defense. Federation technology integrated with Devourer capabilities. Exactly. The Devourers can absorb energy attacks that would vaporize any conventional ship. Federation shields can deflect the temporal distortions that the Hunters use to erase their targets. Together we might have a chance. Dr. Kethmore was already running calculations on his portable devices. The energy requirements would be enormous. We'd need to coordinate power outputs across dozens of star systems simultaneously. The Devourers can serve as living conduits, Marcus suggested. They can channel energy across interstellar distances instantaneously. With proper coordination, we could create a defense grid spanning multiple sectors. But even as he spoke, Marcus could sense resistance from both sides. The Federation delegates were reluctant to trust former enemies with their most sensitive technologies, while the Devourer collective struggled with the concept of revealing their capabilities to potential prey. Admiral Veltar voiced the concerns of many. Even if we agreed to this alliance, we have no way of knowing if the Devourers would honor their commitments once the immediate threat has passed. You have my word, Marcus replied. As long as I lead the collective, they will not harm Federation citizens or territory. And what happens when you die? Counselor Thexani asked bluntly. Humans have limited lifespans. Will the collective revert to their old behavior once you're gone? The question struck at the heart of Marcus's deepest fears. He could feel his human biology slowly adapting to accommodate the Devourer consciousness, but he didn't know if the merger would extend his lifespan or simply burn him out faster. Through the collective link, he sensed an unexpected response. The fragments were discussing something among themselves, sharing concepts too complex for human understanding. When they reached consensus, their unified voice spoke through Marcus. We propose a new form of existence, the collective said through him. Not human, not Devourer, but synthesis. Others, like Cain, could be created, a leadership caste that bridges both natures. The implications were staggering. Marcus was suggesting the creation of an entirely new form of life, beings that combined human adaptability with Devourer power, capable of serving as permanent intermediaries between the species. Volunteers from multiple species, Marcus elaborated, his own thoughts merging with those of the collective. Individuals willing to undergo the merger process, to become hybrid leaders capable of understanding both organic and energy-based consciousness. Dr. Kethmore was fascinated despite his fear. The neural modifications required would be unprecedented. We're talking about fundamentally altering the basic structure of organic consciousness. It's been done before, Marcus reminded him. I'm living proof that the process is possible, and unlike the Devourer's previous absorption method, this would be truly voluntary, with the organic personality remaining intact and dominant. Another alarm interrupted the discussion. The Federation scout's voice returned, now edged with panic. The unknown vessels have accelerated. They'll reach the outer colonies in 4 days, not 6. We need immediate evacuation orders. Marcus felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders. Philosophical discussions about the future of galactic civilization would have to wait. Right now, billions of lives hung in the balance. Admiral, Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of both human military training and cosmic consciousness. I need you to authorize emergency fleet mobilization. Every ship, every weapon, every defensive platform the Federation can muster. And the Devourers? Veltar asked. Marcus turned to the fragments behind him, feeling their ancient fear warring with newfound hope. For millions of years they had run from the Hunters, but now for the first time they had allies. The collective will take the front lines, Marcus announced. We'll buy the Federation time to implement the defense grid. But I need a commitment from this council. Win or lose, the Devourers will have a place in this galaxy when the fighting is over. The vote that followed was the closest in Federation history. But as reports of Hunter activities continued to flood in from the Outer Rim, Even the most reluctant delegates recognized that conventional solutions would not be enough. The greatest alliance in galactic history was about to be forged in the crucible of an extinction-level threat. The Battle of Sigma Draconis would be remembered as the moment two ancient enemies became allies against an even greater threat. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Federation flagship, his enhanced consciousness simultaneously coordinating Devourer movements across a dozen star systems while interfacing with Federation tactical computers. The hunters had emerged from hyperspace like wounds in reality itself. Their ships defied conventional understanding, geometric impossibilities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Where they passed, space itself became unstable, stars flickering as their fundamental properties were questioned by entities that rejected the very concept of existence. All Federation vessels assumed defensive positions around the colony worlds. Admiral Veltar commanded from his position beside Marcus. Devourer units, begin energy absorption protocols. Through the collective consciousness, Marcus felt thousands of Devourer fragments moving into position. They had configured themselves into massive energy collectors. Their forms spread across millions of cubic kilometers of space. As the hunters' reality distortion weapons fired, the Devourers absorbed the chaotic energies, converting them into usable power for the defense grid. But the cost was enormous. Marcus felt each fragment's pain as they took in energies that were antithetical to their nature. Several smaller fragments simply dissolved under the strain, their consciousness absorbed back into the collective before they could be completely destroyed. Hunter formation approaching the fourth planet, reported Captain Sivek from the cruiser Determination. Their weapons are charging some kind of temporal distortion field. Marcus had seen this attack pattern in the collective's memories. The hunters would create a bubble of accelerated time around their target, aging entire worlds to dust in seconds. It was how they had destroyed the Devourer homeworld eons ago. All Devourer units converge on the fourth planet, Marcus commanded. Form a temporal barrier. Federation ships channel all shield power through the Devourer network. The response was immediate. Hundreds of Devourer fragments flowed through space like living shadows, their forms interlocking to create a massive web around the threatened world. When the hunter's temporal weapon fired, the energy struck the barrier and was dispersed across the entire network. The colony world survived, but the Devourer fragments that had formed the barrier were visibly diminished. Marcus felt their exhaustion through the link, the way their consciousness had been stretched thin by the effort of containing forces that existed outside normal physics. We can't keep this up indefinitely. Dr. Kethmore reported from the science station. The energy requirements are beyond anything we've ever calculated. We're asking the Devourers to absorb the output of multiple supernovas simultaneously. Marcus knew the scientist was right, but he also understood something the Federation didn't. The hunters weren't just attacking random targets. They were testing the defense grid, probing for weaknesses. Each assault was designed to force the Devourers to reveal more of their capabilities. They're learning our strategies, Marcus announced to the bridge crew. The hunters adapt to whatever opposition they encounter. Every defense we show them makes them stronger. Admiral Veltar's tentacles writhed with frustration. Then what do you suggest? We can't protect the colonies without using our full capabilities. Through the collective consciousness, Marcus felt an ancient memory stirring. Deep in the Devourer, racial memory was a technique that had never been successfully implemented. A final gambit that could either destroy the hunters or annihilate the Devourers themselves. There's something called the Unity Protocol, Marcus said slowly, accessing memories that were millions of years old. The Devourers attempted it once before during the first Hunter invasion. It involves merging the entire collective into a single entity powerful enough to challenge the hunters directly. What happened when they tried it? Lyra Moss asked from the diplomatic station. Marcus felt the collective's pain at the memory. They failed. The Unity Protocol requires perfect synchronization across the entire species, and without proper leadership, the collective consciousness couldn't maintain coherence. The resulting explosion destroyed 3 star systems and scattered the Devourers across the galaxy. But now they had something they'd never had before, a leader who understood both collective consciousness and individual identity. Marcus realized that his human nature, his ability to maintain personal autonomy while connected to the group mind, might be the key to making the Unity Protocol work. It's never been attempted with a hybrid consciousness, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic possibility. A human mind might be able to provide the stable core the protocol requires. The implications were staggering. If successful, the Unity Protocol would create a being of almost godlike power, capable of challenging the Hunters on equal terms. But failure would mean the complete destruction of the Devourer Collective, and likely most of this star system. Another wave of Hunter attacks interrupted his thoughts. This time they were targeting the Federation's mobile shipyards, attempting to prevent the construction of new vessels. The Devourers responded by forming defensive screens around the industrial platforms, but Marcus could feel their growing exhaustion. "Marcus," Admiral Veltar said quietly, "if you're considering what I think you're considering, I need to remind you that the Federation cannot afford to lose you. You're the only thing keeping the Devourers cooperative. And if we don't stop the Hunters here, cooperation won't matter," Marcus replied. "They'll systematically erase every inhabited world in the galaxy. The Devourers know this. It's why they're willing to risk everything." Through the collective link, Marcus felt the fragments' unanimous agreement. They had been running from the Hunters for so long that the prospect of finally making a stand, even at the cost of their own existence, was almost a relief. "I need volunteers from the Federation," Marcus announced. "Individuals willing to undergo emergency consciousness merger. The Unity Protocol requires multiple hybrid minds to maintain stability." The response was immediate. Captain Sivek was the first to volunteer, followed by Dr. Kethmore and dozens of other officers. Even some of the civilian evacuation coordinators stepped forward, understanding that their individual sacrifice might save billions of lives. "The merger process is irreversible," Marcus warned them. "You'll retain your personalities, but you'll never be entirely human again. You'll be something new, something that bridges the gap between organic and energy-based consciousness." "Better than being erased by the Hunters," Captain Sivek replied grimly. The emergency merger procedures took place aboard the flagship while the battle raged around them. Marcus guided each volunteer through the process, using his own experience to smooth their transition from purely organic consciousness to hybrid awareness. It was exhausting work, requiring him to split his attention between multiple mergers while maintaining coordination of the Devourer defense grid. One by one, the volunteers emerged changed. Their eyes held the same starlight depths as Marcus's, and their voices carried harmonics that resonated through multiple dimensions. Each merger strengthened the collective consciousness while adding new perspectives and capabilities. 12 hybrid consciousnesses achieved, Dr. Kethmore reported, his transformed voice carrying notes that human ears couldn't detect. The collective reports readiness for Unity Protocol implementation. Marcus felt the moment approaching like a tide of cosmic energy. Around them, the battle continued to rage, but he knew it was about to become irrelevant. In the next few minutes, either the Hunters would be stopped permanently, or this entire region of space would cease to exist. "All Federation vessels, withdraw to minimum safe distance," Marcus commanded. "Prepare for Unity Protocol activation." As the ships began their retreat, Marcus felt the collective consciousness gathering itself for the greatest gamble in galactic history. Millions of Devourer fragments began to converge, their individual awarenesses flowing together into a single, vast intelligence. At the center of it all, Marcus and his fellow hybrids served as the stable core around which the Unity could form. For the first time in cosmic history, the Devourers had a chance to become something greater than the sum of their parts. The final battle was about to begin. The Unity Protocol began with silence. Across the Sigma Draconis system, millions of Devourer fragments suddenly stopped their individual movements and hung motionless in space. The Federation ships, now safely withdrawn to the outer system, watched in amazement as the dark entities began to flow toward a single point like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Marcus felt his consciousness expanding beyond anything he had ever imagined. Through the collective link, he experienced existence from the perspective of beings who had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies. The hybrid cores, himself and the 11 other volunteers, served as anchor points, maintaining individual identity, while the vast Devourer consciousness flowed around and through them. The Unity took shape slowly, a process that existed as much in abstract dimensions as in normal space. What emerged was unlike anything that had ever existed in the known universe. a being of pure consciousness given form through collective will, spanning thousands of kilometers and radiating power that made stars seem dim by comparison. The hunters' response was immediate and violent. Their reality distortion weapons focused on the emerging unity, attempting to unravel its existence before it could fully manifest. But the unity was no longer bound by conventional physics. It existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its consciousness distributed across probability streams that the hunters couldn't fully target. Marcus, maintaining his role as the primary anchor point, felt the weight of cosmic forces flowing through his awareness. The unity wasn't just powerful, it was fundamentally different from anything that had come before. Where the hunters sought to negate existence, the unity affirmed it. Where the devourers had once consumed to understand, the unity understood through integration and harmony. Form complete. Dr. Kethmore's voice resonated through the collective consciousness, though his individual identity remained distinct within the vast awareness. All hybrid cores stable. Beginning engagement protocols. The first direct confrontation between Unity and Hunters was more philosophical debate than physical battle. The Hunters projected waves of pure negation, attempting to convince reality that the Unity had never existed. The Unity responded with affirmation protocols, asserting not just its own existence but the inherent value of all consciousness. Where their opposing forces met, space itself began to change. The fundamental constants of physics flickered as two incompatible worldviews struggled for dominance. Matter spontaneously created itself in some regions while dissolving into probability clouds in others. The Hunters are adapting, Captain Sivek reported through the link. They're attempting to corrupt the hybrid cores directly. Marcus felt the attack as a whisper in his mind. A voice that suggested his entire existence was meaningless, that consciousness itself was a cosmic error that needed correction. The temptation to simply stop existing was almost overwhelming, but human stubbornness proved to be the perfect counter to hunter philosophy. Where other species might have been swayed by logical arguments for non-existence, humans possessed an irrational determination to persist despite overwhelming odds. Marcus and his fellow hybrids held firm, their refusal to accept negation providing the stability the unity needed. The battle shifted to the quantum level, fought with weapons that existed more as concepts than physical objects. The hunters deployed causality bombs that attempted to prevent the unity from having ever been formed. The unity responded by reinforcing its own timeline, creating temporal anchors that made its existence a necessary part of universal history. Through it all, Marcus felt the weight of leadership, not just over the Devourer collective, but over the direction of cosmic evolution itself. The unity wasn't just fighting for survival, it was establishing a new paradigm for how consciousness could exist in the universe. Integration, complete, he announced to both the collective and the watching Federation fleet. Beginning final phase. What followed transcended traditional concepts of victory or defeat. The unity didn't destroy the hunters so much as prove them wrong. By demonstrating that consciousness could exist harmoniously on a cosmic scale, that diverse forms of awareness could cooperate rather than compete, the unity presented a counter-argument to the hunters' philosophy of negation. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The hunter vessels began to flicker, their impossible geometries becoming unstable as their fundamental beliefs were challenged. One by one they simply faded from existence, not destroyed but convinced that their purpose was no longer necessary. Hunter fleet is dissipating, Admiral Veltar reported from the flagship, his voice filled with disbelief. Energy signatures are dropping across the board. They're just leaving. But Marcus understood what the Federation couldn't see. The hunters hadn't been defeated in any conventional sense. They had been presented with evidence that the universe had evolved beyond their original purpose. Faced with proof that consciousness could achieve true unity, rather than endless conflict, they had chosen to withdraw rather than fight a war they no longer believed in. The unity began to dissolve as the immediate threat passed, the collective consciousness separating back into its component parts. But the change was permanent. The devourers who emerged from the unity were different, no longer driven by desperate hunger, but by genuine curiosity about the universe around them. Marcus found himself back in his individual form, though forever changed by the experience. The other hybrid cores manifested nearby, their human features now permanently marked by starlight patterns that shifted like living constellations. Status report, Marcus requested, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through multiple dimensions. All Federation vessels accounted for, Admiral Veltar responded. Colony worlds are secure. And the Devourers, they're not attacking anything. They're just exploring. Through the collective link, Marcus could feel the truth of that statement. The Unity Protocol had fundamentally altered the Devourer nature. Where once they had absorbed other forms of life out of desperate loneliness, they now approached the universe with genuine wonder. They wanted to learn, to grow, to become part of something larger than themselves without destroying what they touched. The implications for galactic civilization were staggering. The most powerful force in known space was now actively committed to preservation and growth, rather than consumption. The Federation had gained not just an ally, but a partner in the truest sense. There will be challenges ahead, Marcus announced to the assembled fleet. Integration won't be easy. The Devourers will need to learn new ways of existing, and the Federation will need to adapt to having cosmic-level allies. But we've proven something important today, that cooperation is stronger than conquest, that unity is more powerful than uniformity. In the months that followed, the galaxy would indeed face challenges. Some Federation species struggled to accept former enemies as partners. Some Devourer fragments found it difficult to suppress their absorption instincts. The hybrid cores, led by Marcus, served as bridges between the two forms of consciousness, helping both sides adapt to their new relationship. But the foundation had been laid for something unprecedented in cosmic history, a truly unified galactic civilization that spanned multiple forms of consciousness. The Devourers became the guardians of dangerous cosmic phenomena, feeding on stellar explosions and quantum storms while protecting inhabited worlds. The Federation provided structure and purpose, giving the collective goals beyond mere survival. And at the center of it all, Marcus Kane, human military commander turned cosmic mediator, continued to serve as the bridge between two very different forms of life. He had been sent to erase the galaxy's greatest threat, but instead had chosen to transform it into its greatest hope. The universe was vast and full of wonders yet to be discovered. For the first time in eons, both humans and Devourers could explore it together, no longer as predators and prey but as partners in the greatest adventure of all, the quest to understand existence itself. The Age of Unity had begun,